Hello and welcome back. In the last two videos, we learned about continuous loops. Continuous loops are very powerful because they can sometimes provide large numbers of candidate eliminations at one time. The only problem is that they are kind of rare. So today we're going to learn about loops that are not 100% perfect and how we can still benefit from them, just like we do with finned and sashimi fish. Many times you will find an AIC that leads back to where it started, but when you try to connect it in order to create a continuous loop, you will realize that something is not quite right. If you encounter a contradiction or see that the propagation rules are broken in the cell where you are trying to connect and close the loop, this will tell you that the loop is not perfectly continuous. But if certain conditions are met, it is still possible to benefit from this situation. You may be able to make a candidate elimination in that cell, or better yet, you may even be able to solve that cell. This is called a discontinuous loop. The bad news is that discontinuous loops are not quite as powerful as continuous loops. But the really good news is that this is one of the most commonly occurring patterns in all of Sudoku. You can find discontinuous loops in almost every puzzle you work on, regardless of the difficulty level. So this is by far one of the very most important solving techniques for you to learn and master. If you want to be a real Sudoku expert, you need to have discontinuous loops down cold. This is an extremely valuable solving technique. The names discontinuous loop and propagation rules are kind of tedious to say over and over again, so please allow me to sometimes abbreviate these things as DLs and the prop rules. You will know what I mean, and it will make things a little easier on me. DL will mean discontinuous loop, and prop rules will mean the propagation rules. Okay? Great. The cell where you find the contradiction is called the cell of discontinuity, and it is only in this cell where logical deductions can be made and where candidate eliminations or digit placements are possible. But it is very important to note that there can only be one cell of discontinuity, i.e. one cell where the prop rules are broken. If you have more than one cell where there is a contradiction, then you've got nothing. Just like a finned fish can only be productive if and when all the fins lie in only one block, a DL can only have one cell of discontinuity, or there is nothing you can do with it. Don't forget that, or it could cause you to make a mistake. There are actually three different types of DLs, i.e. three possible ways that the links can enter and exit the cell of discontinuity in order for us to gain any benefit from it. There is actually a fourth way for the links to enter and leave the cell, which also break the prop rules, but this fourth way does not constitute a DL. I have never seen or heard anyone else explain this, so you have definitely come to the right place to learn about discontinuous loops. One of the easiest ways to identify a DL is by applying the propagation rules, because in the cell of discontinuity, you will see that the prop rules are broken. In my opinion, probably the best reason to learn the prop rules at all is to help you identify discontinuous loops. You can, of course, identify DLs without using the prop rules, but I do think that the rules can help you recognize them a little more quickly. Today we will learn what the cell of discontinuity looks like, and then each of the next three tutorials will be dedicated to one of the three types of DLs, and we will go into great detail on them, fully explaining the logic of how and why they work, one at a time, with lots of examples of each type, okay? I will also be showing you some alternative and non-traditional ways to envision types 1 and 3, which will hopefully help you find them more easily and will sometimes produce an even greater benefit than you might get by only looking at them in the traditional way. Again, this is one of my own unique perspectives that you can actually read about on my website, sudokuswami.com, on the Sudoku Essays page. It is the first essay, and it is entitled Debunking Discontinuous Nice Loops, but we'll get to all that later. The logical inferences in these DLs can sometimes be a little esoteric and hard to wrap your head around, but I will do my best to unravel it all for you so that you will fully understand it. We will go over all of that in the next 3 videos. There are actually 7 ways that 2 links can interact with a cell. 3 of them obey the propagation rules, and 3 of them will result in a discontinuous loop. And the last way leads to nothing at all. It is simply a dead end. But before we take a look at all 7 of these ways, there are 3 important stipulations that I would like to make clear. First, I am assuming that you are using an app or a computer program that features automatically updated candidate lists, or that you have correctly filled in all the possible candidates for each cell by hand. If you are not seeing all the possibilities for each cell, then you will not be able to envision any of the configurations I will be describing here today and in the next 3 videos. You must be able to see all possible candidates for every unfilled cell. Second, we need to realize that in all 7 of these configurations, there has to be at least 2 candidates in the cell we are examining. Because if there is only 1 candidate remaining in a cell, it is a naked single, and you can just enter it straight away without fooling around with any of this stuff. And third, just remember that in any kind of chain or loop, the links must always alternate: strong, weak, or weak, strong, or you won't be able to make any sense out of it. I explain the reasons for this in videos number 3, number 4, and number 33. So if you are unsure about why this is true, please go back and watch those 3 videos, okay? Great. Now, in each and every one of the following examples, it makes no difference which link we perceive as entering the cell and which link we perceive as leaving the cell. A strong link is strong in either direction, and a weak link is weak in either direction. So it makes absolutely no difference which direction you go when we are analyzing these cells and these links, okay? All right, so here are the 7 ways. The first 3 obey the prop rules, so let's go over the 3 rules. Because if you have forgotten what they are, how are you possibly going to know if they are broken or not? Ha ha. Actually, you can detect a contradiction just by alternating strong and weak links without using the prop rules. But as I said earlier, I think it will help you if you know how to apply the rules. Now you have to use your imagination here and try to visualize that there is a chain of links connected to the loose ends of the 2 links you see entering and leaving each of these cells, and that they alternate strong, weak, okay? All right, so rule number 1 says that if a cell has 2 strong links, they must be connected to 2 different digit candidates, and the cell can be by value or not. This simply means that with 2 strong links, it makes no difference how many candidates are in the cell as long as there are at least 2. So in these 4 cells, A, B, C, and D, you can see that this is the case. 2 strong links connected to 2 different digit candidates. In A and B, there are more than 2 candidates, and in C and D, there are only 2 candidates. And this works great either way, because you can draw or visualize a weak link between the 2 highlighted candidates in each of those 4 cells, and it will follow the strong, weak, strong alternating sequence. Remember, the propagation rules are only concerned with the 2 links that are entering and leaving the cell. So any of these 4 configurations would be valid if they appeared in a chain or a loop. And as you can see, the links in A and B are moving in opposite directions, and the links in C and D are moving in opposite directions. This configuration will work regardless of which direction you are moving. And rule number 2 says that if a cell has 2 weak links, they must be connected to 2 different digit candidates, but this time the cell must be a bi-value cell. This is because you must be able to draw or visualize a strong link between those 2 candidates, and the only way you can make a strong link within a cell is in a bi-value cell. If there were 3 or more candidates in the cell, you could only make a weak link inside that cell, and this is not going to work, because you would have 3 weak links in a row, and that would not be a valid or logical sequence. So all 4 of these cells would constitute a valid configuration for any chain or loop. And again, as you can see, the links in A and B are moving in opposite directions, and the links in C and D are moving in opposite directions. And again, this is going to work regardless of which direction you are moving. And lastly, rule number 3 says that if a cell has 1 weak link and 1 strong link, they must both be connected to the same candidate. And just like with rule number 1, it doesn't matter how many candidates there are in the cell, as long as there are at least 2. And so with rule number 3, there is no need to draw or visualize a link within the cell because you have weak, strong, or strong, weak, and this follows the normal rules for alternating links in any chain or loop. So any one of these 4 cells would constitute a valid configuration. And once again, as you can see, the links in A and B are moving in opposite directions, and the links in C and D are moving in opposite directions. And once again, this is going to work regardless of which direction you are moving. Okay, so those are all examples of valid configurations. But now let's see what happens and what it looks like when these rules are violated. All right, in a discontinuous loop type 1, the cell of discontinuity is going to look like this. There will be 2 weak links connected to the same candidate, and it makes no difference how many candidates are in that cell as long as there are at least 2. Remember, in my tutorials, weak links are always represented by green arrows. Propagation rule number 3 just told us that in order to function normally, when you have 2 links connected to the same candidate, then there must be 1 weak link and 1 strong link so that the links can maintain the required alternating sequence. So if you have a loop and you come to a cell that looks like any one of these 4 examples, then you are going to have 2 weak links in a row, and this breaks the rules. And if you go through the logic here, you will discover a contradiction. A weak link begins with assuming the first candidate is true, right? If A is true, then B is false. So here in cell A, if we leave this 9 on a weak link, we will start out by assuming it is true. But if you follow the inferences around and all the links alternate as they should, the link that returns to this cell, this other weak link coming back to the 9, is going to tell you that the 9 is false. So your chain of inferences will essentially be saying, if the 9 is true, then the 9 is false. And of course, this sounds crazy. It is a contradiction. In many of my previous tutorials in which I talk about logic, you may recall that if a conditional statement leads to a contradiction, like it does here, then we will know that the premise must be false. So because our original premise was, if the 9 is true, we can be sure that this premise is false, meaning the 9 cannot be true. Does everybody get that? Now don't worry, in the next video, tutorial number 42, we will examine this configuration in much more detail. And after I explain it, you will be 100% confident that when you see 2 weak links attached to the same candidate in an otherwise perfect loop, you will know that that candidate is false and can be eliminated. And of course, this will work no matter which direction you are going. And if the cell of discontinuity is a bi-value cell, like down here in examples C and D, you will be able to solve that cell with the other candidate because it will be the only one left. And as you might have already guessed, in a DL type 2, the cell of discontinuity is going to look like this. There will be 2 strong links connected to the same candidate, and again, it makes no difference how many candidates are in that cell as long as there are at least 2. The blue arrows denote strong links. So if you have a loop and you come to a cell that looks like one of these 4 examples, then you are going to have 2 strong links in a row, and again, this breaks the rules. And if you go through the logic here, you will discover another contradiction. A strong link begins with assuming the first candidate is false, right? If A is false, then B is true. So here in cell A, if we leave this 7 on a strong link, we will start by assuming it is false. But if you follow the inferences around and all the links alternate as they should, the link that returns to the cell, this other strong link coming back to the 7 from below, is going to tell you that the 7 is true. So your chain of inferences will essentially be saying, if the 7 is false, then the 7 is true. And again, this sounds crazy. It is another contradiction, except this one is the exact opposite of a DL type 1. And because this is a contradiction, we know that the original premise must be false, right? And what was the original premise here? It was if the 7 is false. So now we have a double negative. We know that the assumption of the 7 being false has to be false. So oddly, this tells us that the 7 is actually true. How about that? And in tutorial number 43, we will examine this configuration in much more detail, and you will be convinced that when you see two strong links attached to the same candidate in an otherwise perfect loop, you will know that that candidate is true, and thus you can solve that cell for that digit, okay? And of course, this will work no matter which direction you are going. And lastly, in a DL type 3, the cell of discontinuity is going to look like this. There will be one weak link and one strong link connected to two different candidates in that cell, and again, it makes no difference how many candidates are in that cell, as long as there are at least two, and it doesn't matter which of those two links is entering the cell and which is leaving the cell. Just like DL's type 1 and 2, this violates prop rule number 3 that says in order to function normally, when you have one weak link and one strong link going into and coming out of a cell, they must both be connected to the same candidate, right? So again, this configuration breaks the rules. If we start with a weak link, we start out by saying if A is true. So let's look at cell A in this diagram, and so we start by assuming the 3 is true. But when you finally return to this cell with a strong link leading to the 7, it will tell you that the 7 is true. So the inferences are saying that if the 3 is true, then the 7 is true. And of course, this cannot be. They cannot both be true. So once again, we have a contradiction that tells us our original premise must be false. So what was our original premise? It was if the 3 is true. This tells us that the 3 cannot be true and must therefore be false, and thus it can be eliminated. But be careful. This does not necessarily mean that the 7 is true. All we know right now is that the 3 is false. But if you have a DL type 3 where the cell of discontinuity is a bi-value cell like you see down here, and we start on a weak link coming off the 6 and return to the cell on a strong link to the 4, we will know that since the 6 is going to turn out to be false, the 4 must be true, but this is only because it is the only other candidate in that cell. It will not be because of the discontinuous loop per se. Capiche? But don't worry if this sounds confusing. In tutorial number 44, we will examine this configuration in much more detail, and you will be convinced that when you see one weak link and one strong link connected to two different candidates in a cell of an otherwise perfect loop, you will know that the weakly linked candidate is false and can be eliminated. And of course, this will again work no matter which direction you are going and no matter which link is entering the cell or which link is leaving the cell. And as I mentioned earlier, there is one last configuration that breaks the propagation rules but does not constitute a cell of discontinuity. This is when you have two weak links that are connected to two different digit candidates, but the cell is not a bi-value cell, i.e. there are more than two candidates in that cell. This would violate propagation rule number 2, and this is the case for all 4 of these cells in this diagram. The reason this does not work is because you cannot make a strong link within any of those cells because there are more than 2 candidates. And so if you were to connect this loop, you would again have 3 weak links in a row, and this will lead to absolutely nothing. No logical deductions, no candidate eliminations, and no digit placements. Got it? And there you have it. Now, before we wrap up for today, let's review and try to memorize the 3 configurations that will constitute a cell of discontinuity. First, we have 2 weak links connected to the same candidate. Then we have 2 strong links connected to the same candidate. And finally, we have 1 weak link and 1 strong link, each connected to a different candidate. These are the 3 configurations you want to watch out for. Just remember that a DL can only have 1 cell of discontinuity, i.e. 1 cell where the propagation rules are broken or where you find a contradiction, or else this technique is not going to work, okay? We will examine the interesting logic of how and why we can make candidate eliminations and digit placements in those cells in the next 3 tutorials. So please stay tuned for all of that. Okay, that's going to do it for today. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, please click the thumbs up icon and the red subscribe button, and be sure to click the little bell icon if you would like to be notified of new video uploads. So I hope to see you back here for tutorial number 42, where we will zero in on DL's type 1, in which there will be 2 weak links, both connected to the same candidate in the cell of discontinuity. We will carefully analyze the logic surrounding this configuration, and we'll go through lots of examples, okay? Until then, be well and be happy.